Some of the most dangerous people in the world, these convicts have been imprisoned in the world's most secure prison, an impenetrable fortress known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Welcome to the 46 most dangerous prisoners residing at ADX Florence. If you enjoy these longer form videos, then please remember to smash the like button to help this video rise in the YouTube algorithm. We have many more videos just like this one scheduled for the rest of the year. Number 46, Salvador Magaluta. One of the world's most prolific transporters of drugs through the continental United States, Salvador Magaluta is estimated to have transported over 75 tons of cocaine into the United States. This Cuban-American former drug kingpin received a 205-year sentence, meaning he is actually scheduled for release on September 28, 2166. Becoming known as Los Muchachos, which is Spanish for the boys, Magaluta is currently appealing the sentence, citing over 40 policy violations. Number 45, Abu Hamza al-MASRI. Egyptian cleric Hamza became famous in the UK after preaching Islamic fundamentalist views on the streets of London right under the noses of both the police and the media. After a lengthy stint in London's most secure prison, Belmarsh, he was extradited to the UK and began his stay at the notorious Metropolitan Detention Centre. He was later convicted of masterminding the 1998 kidnapping of Westerners in Yemen and conspiring to establish a terrorist training camp in Oregon, earning him a life sentence at ADX Florence. Number 44, Perry Rourke. The leader of one of the most feared gangs in the Maryland Department of Corrections, Perry Rourke helped found Dead Man Incorporated and was a close associate of the Black Gorilla family. Known for targeting both rivals and correctional staff, drug trafficking within prisons became commonplace as the gang grew in size and power. Rourke later pleaded guilty to racketeering, conspiracy to murder and trafficking charges, receiving a sentence of life in prison. He was partially transferred to USP Florence High, but was returned to ADX Florence in 2020. Number 43, Richard McNair. Known to be a cunning escape artist, McNair escaped from the Ward County Jail, North Dakota in 1987, from the North Dakota State Penitentiary in 1992, and from USP Pollock, Louisiana in 2006. McNair is serving 2 life sentences on state murder charges from North Dakota in 1987 and was one of the top 15 fugitives wanted by US Marshals before his arrest. McNair has described his current conditions as unescapable in media interviews and states that people in his pod are so dangerous, even he avoids contact with them. Number 42, Walter Myers. Pleading guilty in 2009 to conspiracy to commit espionage for providing classified US national defense documents and information to Cuba, this spy is currently serving a life sentence at the prison. After passing information to the Cubans for over 30 years, Myers was sentenced in 2010 and pleaded guilty to a number of counts, including espionage and wire fraud. Number 41, Robert HANSSEN. One of the most famous double agents in FBI history, Robert HANSSEN spied for Soviet and Russian intelligence services against the United States from 1979 to 2001. He pleaded guilty to 13 counts of espionage, 1 count of attempted espionage, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit espionage in 2001. Sentenced to 15 consecutive sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole, he is never getting out of prison and will remain in ADX Florence for the rest of his life. Number 40, NOSHIR GOWADIA. One of the principal designers of the B-2 stealth bomber and former engineer for the US Department of Defense, he was later revealed to have been passing top-secret stealth tech to China. The information included cruise missile technology, and he received a 32-year sentence and is scheduled for release on January 31st, 2033. The jury deliberated for 5.5 days before returning a guilty verdict street on GOWADIA, and he was lucky as he could have easily received a life sentence for his crimes. Number 39, Muhammad Mahmoud Al-Farek. Reportedly radicalized by one of the men charged with the 2009 New York City subway bombing plot, Farek was convicted of terrorism-related charges in 2017. He attended Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and helped plan the attack on forward operating base Chapman in Khost via supporting material. Currently serving a 45-year sentence, this Houston-born American citizen is scheduled for release on August 5th, 2053. Number 38, Nasser Jason Abdo. Former American Army Private First Class, Abdo was arrested July 28, 2011 near Fort Hood, Texas, accused of planning to attack a restaurant full of soldiers from the base. Sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 60 years for attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction, attempted murder of federal employees, and weapons charges. He is currently serving the term at ADX Florence after it was deemed too dangerous for him to be held elsewhere, even though he had not been charged with any terrorism offences. Number 37, Faisal Shahzad. Arrested approximately 53 hours after an attempt to detonate a car bomb in Times Square, New York, Faisal Shahzad confessed to 10 counts arising from the bombing attempt in a court. Shahzad was unrepentant after the attempt, and he was sentenced to 2 life imprisonment terms without the possibility of parole. Currently held at Supermax, his charges include attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction and attempting an act of a terrorist attack. Number 36, Eric Rudolph. Known as the Olympic Park bomber, Rudolph is a convicted American domestic terrorist who carried out the Olympic Park bombing at the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. He was on the run for 5 years while making the top of the FBI top 10 most wanted fugitives list before being caught in 2003. After pleading guilty to numerous state and federal homicide charges, he received 4 life sentences in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. While he spends 23 hours a day alone in his 80-square-foot concrete cell, he has written letters that made publications on several websites, something the prison is powerless to stop. Number 35, Carboni Savage. American drug dealer, organised crime leader, and murderer who is currently on federal death row, Savage is one of ADX Florence's most notorious inmates. Currently holding 13 death sentences, a sentence of life imprisonment, and a consecutive 10-year sentence. His convictions include witness tampering, murder in aid of racketeering, use of firearms to commit a felony, threatening a witness, drug trafficking, and retaliating against a witness resulting in death. ADX Florence currently has no death chamber, and it's understood he will be transferred to the United States Penitentiary Terre Haute in Indiana, where an execution date is already set. Number 34, OG Mac. An American gang leader known for founding the 1-8 Trey Gangsters and United Blood Nation while serving time at Rikers Island. Mac has been convicted of 10 counts of criminal activity including racketeering, murder, conspiracy, credit card fraud, and drug trafficking. He was initially moved to, then from, and then back to ADX Florence. He was profiled in an episode of the documentary series Gangsters, America's Most Evil in 2018, and is currently serving a 50-year sentence in the prison. Number 33, Jeff Fort. Also known as Abdul Malik Kabar, Fort is an American gangster and former gang leader from Chicago, Illinois. After helping to co-found the Black P. Stones gang, he was convicted of conspiracy and weapons charges for plotting to commit acts inside the US and ordering a murder. After attempting to receive $2.5 million from Libya and drug trafficking in 1983, he was sentenced to 168 years in federal prison, meaning he will spend the rest of his life at ADX Florence. Number 32, Luis Felipe. Cuban-American former gang leader Luis Felipe is the founder of the New York arm of the Latin Kings. Convicted of ordering multiple murders from prison, he was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 46 years without parole, and the express permission of the court is that he serve the sentence in solitary confinement. The sentence forbids him to write or be visited by anyone except his lawyer and close relatives, and no, Felipe has no close relatives, meaning guards and his lawyers are his only contacts for the rest of his life. Number 31, Francisco Javier Arellano Felix. Former Mexican drug lord who alongside his brothers founded and led the Tijuana cartel, Francisco ran one of the largest drug cartels in Mexico. Well known for its employment of enforcers, many street gangsters were trained to become assassins within the cartel and at one point were responsible for supplying half the cocaine sold in the United States. Arellano Felix was sanctioned under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act, a rarely used sanction from the United States Department of the Treasury. He is one of the few people on the list who may no longer reside at ADX Florence after his life sentence was reduced to 23.5 years and his location was redacted. Number 30, Jose Padilla. Padilla was arrested in 2002 on suspicion of plotting a radiological bomb attack before being moved to a military prison in South Carolina. Deemed an enemy combatant who was not entitled to a trial in civilian courts, he was later moved to a civilian jail in 2006. Convicted in a federal court of aiding terrorists in 2007, he was initially sentenced to 17 years in prison, later increased to 21 years. While he is still serving his sentence at ADX Florence, Padilla is expected at some point to participate in the prison's Step Down project, either moving to a lower security area or a smaller jail entirely. Number 29, Aqaid Ullah. Sentenced to a life in prison for the bombing of New York City subway station in 2017, Ullah detonated the bomb which was strapped to his chest in a long, busy passageway. While there was no evidence he ever communicated directly with ISIS, prosecutors say he followed his uncle to the United States 10 years ago and became an ISIS sympathizer. While he was sentenced to life, a 30-year sentence was also imposed from a specific charge, meaning he will probably die in prison. Number 28, Mohammed Rashid Dawood. Mohammed Rashid Dawood Olawale is a British-born Saudi terrorist who was sentenced to life without parole for his part in the 1998 United States Embassy bombings. Originating from a wealthy family somewhat like bin Laden, he attended a private training facility in 1996 and travelled to Kenya on a false passport. After cooperating with the FBI willingly, he managed to escape the death penalty after jurors failed to unanimously agree on a death sentence. Number 27, Abdul Rahman El-Bansawi. Another convicted terrorist, he plotted to carry out an attack on Times Square in New York City and to also attack the subway system. Sentenced to 40 years in federal prison under intensive solitary confinement, he attacked a USP Allenwood corrections officer and was moved to ADX Florence after being deemed too dangerous to stay anywhere else. Number 26, Amor Fatoui. Sentenced to life imprisonment for stabbing a police officer at the airport in Flint, Michigan, Amor Fatoui stated in court he would try to kill again if free. Fatoui, who lived in Montreal, Canada, had only been in the United States for 5 days but trialed several times to buy guns. He was also charged with violence at an international airport and interference with airport security. Number 25, Ahmed Khan Rahimi. The ADX facility, as you have probably worked out by now, is a terrorist prison, and our next inmate injured 30 people when he set off bombs in Manhattan and New Jersey. After a shootout with police, he was captured and convicted in 2017 on all 8 counts, including the use of a weapon of mass destruction and bombing a public place. Sentenced to multiple life terms in prison without the possibility of parole, Rahimi was moved to the Supermax after trying to radicalize others in prison to support Islamic State. Number 24, Tarek Mahina. Convicted of conspiracy to provide material to support Al-Qaeda pharmacist, Tarek Mahina was sentenced in April 2012 to 17 years in federal prison. He was also sentenced to conspiracy to commit murder in a foreign country, conspiracy to make false statements to the FBI, and 2 counts of making false statements. Mahina appealed his case several times but was unsuccessful. Number 23, Wadi El-Hage. A naturalized American citizen, El-Hage was convicted on conspiracy charges for the 1998 United States Embassy bombings. After emigrating to the United States, he developed an interest in militant interpretations of Islamic theory. After a return from Afghanistan to Nairobi, he was arrested and questioned for 2 days, later returning to Arlington with his family. Arrested on his return to the United States, El-Hage denied knowing bin Laden and others accused of the embassy bombings. Resentenced to life without parole in 2013, he is currently held at the ADX facility. Number 22, Mohammed Jabara. After becoming an active member in Al-Qaeda circles, he was arrested in 2002 and convicted of terrorism-related offences. He was accused of violating his release conditions and rearrested after spending time in a series of safe houses which were found to contain bomb-making equipment. Held in the Manhattan Detention Center until he was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment, he resides at ADMAX. Number 21, Mahmoud Abu Halima. Another convicted terrorist, this time of the 1993 World Trade Center bombings. Abu Halima, also known as Mahmoud the Red, was originally born in Egypt. He returned to the United States after a 3-year stay in Germany and applied for amnesty under the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. Working as a New York City cab driver for 5 years from 1986 to 1991, he saw his license suspended 10 times. He was the subject of an FBI investigation through January 1993, which was called off days before the first World Trade Center bombing. He was sentenced to 240 years in prison, but this was cut to 78 years and 4 months on appeal, meaning he is scheduled for release on March 8, 2060, when he will be 101 years old. Number 20, Mamdouh Mahmoud Salim. Sudanese co-founder of the Islamist terrorist network Al-Qaeda, Salim was extradited to the United States and charged with participating in the 1998 United States embassy bombings. He attempted to escape during his pre-trial incarceration and was convicted of attempted murder after stabbing one prison guard. He was resentenced to life without parole in August 2010 after the original judge failed to rule that the stabbing was not part of a terrorism plot. Salim is known to have made efforts in 1993 to obtain the components for nuclear weapons. Number 19, Ahmed Rassem. Convicted in 2001 of planning to bomb Los Angeles International Airport, Rassem was initially sentenced to 22 years in prison. He was resentenced to 37 years imprisonment in October 2012 after the sentence was found to be unduly lenient. Number 18, Anthony Casso. Nicknamed Gaspipe, American mobster and underboss of the Lucci's crime family, Casso was often regarded as a homicidal maniac within the mafia. Casso admitted several attempts to murder the Gambino family boss John Gotti and was later sentenced to 455 years in prison for racketeering, extortion and murder. He initially served time in prison at the ADX facility but was transferred to a medical facility for treatment of prostate cancer in March 2009. He spent another 4 years at ADX before being moved to a halfway house and then on to the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. Casso by this time was seriously ill, suffering from coronary artery disease, kidney disease, hypertension, bladder disease and lung issues from years of smoking. He was placed in medical isolation USP Tuscan before being moved to hospital in respiratory distress and later put on a ventilator. He died on December 15, 2020 at the age of 78. Number 17, Umar Abdul Muttalab. Popular in newspapers and media and referred to as the underwear bomber or Christmas bomber, this Nigerian-born terrorist attempted to detonate plastic explosives while on board Northwest Airlines Flight 253. Having been supplied the bomb by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Abdul Muttalab was convicted in a US federal court on 8 federal criminal counts. Charges included attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction and attempted murder of 289 people. He was sentenced to 4 life terms plus 50 years without parole, for which there is really only one place he can be kept: ADX. Number 16, Suleiman Abu Ghaith. Suleiman Abu Ghaith is a Kuwaiti whom is regarded as one of Al-Qaeda's most prominent spokesmen. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on guilty charges of conspiring to kill Americans and providing material to support terrorists. Ghaith appeared in several videos with Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, most notably in the caves of Afghanistan. Number 15, Dzhokhar Zarnev. Kyrgyzstan-American terrorist Zarnev was convicted of perpetrating the Boston Marathon bombing by planting pressure cooker bombs near the finish line of the race. After killing 3 people and injuring approximately 280 others, he was found guilty on all 30 counts of the indictment at trial. Charges ranging from usage of a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death, in addition to aiding and abetting. He was sentenced to death on 6 of 17 capital murder counts. His death sentence was formally delivered on 24th of June 2015, where he apologised to the injured and the bereaved in the bombings. Originally scheduled to reside at Terre Haute Death Row, unique security management requirements caused the agency to place Zarnev in Colorado ADX facility. Number 14, James Marcello. Known by many nicknames such as Little Jimmy, Jimmy Light and Jimmy the Man, Marcello was a front boss for the Chicago outfit of the US Mafia. He received a 12.5-year sentence in 1995 for financing longtime mobster Lenny Patrick's juice loan operation and racketeering charges. Later in 2005, he was indicted on murder and racketeering charges with his younger half-brother Michael Mickey Marcello. He was convicted of murder on February 5, 2009 and was sentenced to life imprisonment, but many appeals followed. After virtually exhausting all of his appeals, he was transferred to another prison and appears to now have ended up at ADX Florence for reasons unknown. Number 13, Timothy McVeigh. A former member of the ADX institution, McVeigh was executed on the 11th of June 2001 at Terre Haute, Indiana, United States Penitentiary for his role in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. The deadliest act of terrorism in the United States prior to the September 11th attacks, McVeigh sought revenge against the government for the 1993 Waco siege that killed 82 people. He sat on death row for only 6 years, a considerably shorter time than most inmates awaiting the death penalty. McVeigh was housed on the ADX block known as Bombers Row, alongside Louis Philippe and Ramzi Youssef before his transfer in 1999. McVeigh, a Gulf War veteran, was denied burial in any military cemetery and was instead cremated. Number 12, Richard Reed. Another famous inmate to reside at the Supermax, Reed is known as the Shoe Bomber, a British terrorist who attempted to detonate a shoe bomb on a transatlantic flight in 2001. His father was a career criminal and Reed converted to Islam as a young man in prison, while later being radicalised by a hook-wielding cleric, Abu Hamza. Reed's convictions are extensive and include attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction, attempted homicide, attempted murder, attempted destruction of an aircraft, and placing or transporting an explosive or incendiary device on an aircraft. He received 3 consecutive life sentences and 110 years without parole after conviction and was also fined $2 million. Number 11, Tyler Bingham. Thought to be one of the 3 most powerful leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood gang, he was indicted on charges of murder, conspiracy, drug trafficking and racketeering, and for ordering killings and beatings from their cells. Convicted of murder, it is thought that due to his gang affiliations, he was considered too dangerous to be housed anywhere other than ADX Florence, and today that is where he resides. Number 10, Simone Trinidad. The first high-ranking member of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia to be captured, Trinidad is currently serving a 60-year sentence in solitary confinement at ADX. Believed to be once in command of the FARC's infamous Caribbean bloc, it's thought he helped kidnap many people, giving the region the highest kidnap rate in all of Colombia. Often quoted as dismissing international humanitarian law, Trinidad announced that the group was going to attack any aircraft or troops that damaged poppy plants in Colombia. Captured in 2004, he was deported to Colombia from Ecuador and faced charges for rebellion, kidnapping and assassination of a Colombian former minister. He received hung juries in 4-month-long trials and all drug-related charges were dropped. However, his 60-year term still stood for kidnapping and attempted murder. Number 9, Dwight York. Former musician and writer best known as the founding leader of several black Muslim groups in New York, he is now a convicted criminal, paedophile and child molester. He has claimed on several occasions to be an extraterrestrial master teacher, but as his projected release date is July 12, 2120, he probably won't be returning to his home planet or anywhere else for that matter. Number 8, David Lane. Now deceased, Lane was a revered figure among white nationalists, and his death was met with demonstrations held in at least 5 US cities, as well as England, Germany, Russia and Ukraine. Serving a 190-year sentence for racketeering, conspiracy and violating the civil rights of Denver talk radio host Alan Burge, he died at Terre Haute Federal Prison, Indiana. Former member of terrorist organization The Order, Lane was author of the 14 Words, the best-known slogan of the modern white supremacist movement in North America. Lane was considered extremely dangerous by the American justice system and spent a considerable time at the ADX Florence facility and other maximum security institutions. He passed away due to an epileptic seizure on May 28, 2007. Number 7. Larry Hoover. Former American gang leader and co-founder of the Chicago street gang Gangster's Disciples, Larry Hoover was sentenced to 200 years for a 1973 murder. He received a second life sentence in 1997 for conspiracy, extortion, money laundering, and running a continuing criminal enterprise by leading the gang from state prison. Having stated that he is no longer a part of the Gangster Disciples, he is currently serving time at ADX, mainly on the basis of his former high-profile gang connections and probably to protect him from harm. Number 6. Michael Swango. One of the more dangerous people locked up at the ADX facility, Swango is estimated to have been involved in as many as 60 fatal poisonings of patients and colleagues. Although admitting to causing only 4 deaths, he is currently serving 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His convictions include 3 counts of first-degree murder in New York State and 1 count of aggravated murder in Ohio. Swango went to great lengths to cover his tracks after the murders, which began in 1983, and he was not caught until the year 2000, having traversed 3 countries and 2 continents. After being stabbed by another inmate in prison, he was sent to ADX Florence at his own request. Swango used poisons, usually arsenic, slipping them into the foods and beverages of co-workers, but also used prescribed medication on patients in hospital. Number 5. Ted John Kaczynski. Considered to be one of the most dangerous terrorists in US history, Ted Kaczynski is also known by his famous nickname, the Unabomber. He lived as a recluse in a remote cabin without electricity or running water near Lincoln, Montana, where he resolved to fight industrialization and its destruction of nature through terrorism. Kaczynski killed 3 people and injured 23 others between 1978 and 1995 in a nationwide bombing campaign. A number of self-written dossiers were sent to law enforcement and media organizations advocate a nature-centered form of anarchism. He was the subject of the longest and most expensive investigation in the history of the FBI, and he was finally caught in 1996. Sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole, he resided at ADX Florence for the best part of 23 years and was only moved to the Federal Medical Center, Butner, North Carolina, for unknown health reasons in 2021. Kaczynski has since indicated that he's suffering from terminal cancer, and the identity of most correspondents he had contact with before arrest will remain sealed until 2049. Number 4. Terry L. Nichols. Convicted of being an accomplice to the Oklahoma City bombing alongside co-conspirator Timothy McVeigh, in 2004 Nichols was convicted of 161 counts of first-degree murder, first-degree arson and conspiracy. Sentenced to 161 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, his jury were deadlocked on the death penalty, sparing him from it but condemning him to die in prison. He spends his days on the Bombers Row unit that housed McVeigh and fellow inmates Ramzi Youssef and Eric Rudolph. Number 3. Zacarias Moussaoui. Moving into the big 3 inmates on the list now, and Zacarias Moussaoui is currently one of the only people to be convicted of direct involvement in the September 11th terrorist attacks. Serving life in prison without parole for conspiring to kill citizens of the United States, he is also charged with conspiring to hijack planes and crash them. While Moussaoui was eligible for the death penalty, Germany intervened and refused to release evidence against Moussaoui unless the death penalty was not sought. Moved from his holding cell in Alexandria, Virginia, he travelled on the famous Con Air and was later described by bin Laden as not being involved in the plan whatsoever. Number 2. El Chapo Guzeman. Newest resident of the Alcatraz Alcatraz of the Rockies, El Chapo Guzeman is a famous drug lord and former leader of the feared Sinaloa cartel. Known as a high-profile escape artist after fleeing from several maximum security prisons through tunnels, many of his convictions relate to drugs and firearms. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, ordered to forfeit more than $12.6 billion, and you can rest assured he won't be escaping the most secure US supermax prison. Criminal convictions include engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to import cocaine, conspiracy to distribute cocaine, distribution of cocaine, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Guzeman was never convicted of the many murders he is thought to have ordered or committed, but we can say for sure he is never leaving ADX. Want to know more about El Chapo? Make sure you check out the very cool video at the end. Number 1. Ramzi Youssef. One of the main perpetrators of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the bombing of Philippine Airlines Flight 434, he also planned to assassinate Pope John Paul II. Arrested by Pakistani intelligence in 1995, he was caught trying to set a bomb in a doll. After his extradition to the United States, Youssef received 2 life sentences plus 240 years for murder and attempted murder, as well as other terrorism charges. His maternal uncle Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is accused of being the principal architect of the September 11th attacks in 2001. He shares the bomber's row unit with several other people already mentioned on the list. The handcuffs Ramzi Youssef wore when he was captured in Pakistan are displayed at the FBI Museum in Washington, D.C. As with most of the people on the list, he will most likely die at ADX Florence. Thanks for watching this video on the 46 most dangerous prisoners at ADX Florence. Please smash a like on the video if you enjoy this kind of content, hit the subscribe button for more content like this coming soon, and don't forget to check out that video on El Chapo on this screen.